everybody to the meeting of the State Board of Elections here on March 19th, 2019. I'm Peter Kaczynski. To my right is Commissioner Kellner. To his right is Commissioner Spano, and to my left is Commissioner Peterson. We will open today's meeting considering the minutes from the last meeting on February 27th. Is there a motion to approve?
I proposed a revision, which I think is distributed.
I believe that's been incorporated into the minutes before us. Yes.
Okay, good. So,
I'm sorry.
Is there a motion? Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So those are approved. We'll begin with unit updates, and the first unit is the executive unit, Bob Brem and Todd Valentine.
Well, we continue our work with the major reforms that have been passed previously, and we'll talk specifically about early voting later on the agenda, just to give you an update on that. But there were other changes that have been passed so far, and some are still pending. The June primary calendar has been passed and adopted. There was a bill that would reduce the signatures yet again, waiting for the governor's signature, and I didn't check this morning if it was signed. Not yet. But what we're really waiting for immediately is the budgetary issues and what comes out of that. We have had meetings with certainly the governor's office, and both the Senate and Assembly have put in funds that would fund the agency appropriately. There are some additional funds for some of the election reform measures, but based upon the surveys we've done for the counties, it might not be enough. But what we're still waiting for is the final budget to see if those funds end up in there. We have a plan ready to go if need be, if those funds are not restored properly, to do what we need to do to cut expenses, because if we don't get sufficient funds to run the agency, it's a significant challenge if that occurs. We know we've talked about that at the last two meetings that we've raised this, but that specter's still there. We took a step forward with both the Senate and Assembly putting the funds in, but we're not there yet. So we'll know sometime after April 1st where we're actually at.
So how short is the budget again? In the governor's proposal, I mean?
It was about $3 million.
Out of a total of 10. Is that correct?
11. It's 11 is the budget. Well, if you take the 1.5 off for enforcement, which was not reduced in any way.
And $3 million of that is the special revenue fund for testing the voting machines, so it's not really a number. So it's around 7.
but we're talking like a 30% staff cut.
Correct.
At a time when our workload has significantly increased because we have to implement
All
these
points
new...
we have made to both houses of the legislature as well as the governor's office. We remain hopeful, but I'm an optimist.
Well, the Senate resolution that they adopted included $3 million. The Assembly is a little over 3 because they have the reappropriate numbers, which would help us with some of the work we need to do with the 5 chapter laws they already did. There aren't significant costs, I think, but there's still some work that we need to do to incorporate a technological solution to the immediate workaround that we've come up with many of the bills. So we give us a little bit of breathing room also under the Assembly budget that they've adopted. They've also included $7 million in aid to localities for early voting and a $27 million appropriation in capital budget for e-poll books and ballot on demand systems. From a budget point of view. I think one of the other items, we do have a vacancy in Senate District 57. We certified the vacancy on March 11th due to the resignation of Catherine Young. We've done a number of other, some of the other bills, certainly the transfer regulations that you adopted at the last meeting. We discussed with the county commissioners on a call that we had with them, the monthly call in February on Thursday after your Wednesday meeting. But we also scheduled a specific call with the counties to talk about the transfer guidance and regulations, and we did that last Friday.
And they did have some input on how they would like to see the transfers done when the county's transferring it back to them. They would like some.
Yeah, we've discussed an interim process, but also we would like to develop in the nice voter is to make technical changes. It's almost like a reverse duplicate checking because of the way the transfers work. But in the interim, the commissioners came to a consensus during the call that they would prefer to transfer information between counties via email. So they asked the state board to do a survey of the single point of contact in each county, which we've sent that survey out. We're collecting the answers, and we will get that information out to the counties as quickly as we can so that they can share that information. Todd mentioned the signature requirement. We're waiting for that. The survey of expenses, we continue to update for early voting expenses. Counties, they learn more, they adjust their numbers, they send them to us, or we notice that they don't necessarily always add up for the columns that we've given them, so we go back and try and get that information straightened out. In New York City only gave us a lump sum of $103 million, I mentioned before. But if you take their $103 million, the itemized numbers that we receive from the counties, plus the people who need the poll books on election day to make the poll books on early voting kind of work together. We're at about 145 million of it's about 160 million of itemized items, and New York City has not given us a dollar amount for e-poll books for either early voting or election day.
So you're talking New York City's
So it's about
budget is
180
for early voting?
New York City, there are 103, they say, for early voting, but I don't know.
You're adding it up to 160.
Well, the whole state.
Oh, for the whole state?
Right.
Sorry.
So other people broke it down by workers or, the categories that are in the survey.
So New York City is 103 out of the 160?
Without e-poll books.
Without e-poll books.
So New York City's 2/3 of the early voting costs in the state, they're estimating. Is that because they have such a large number of sites, or why would theirs be 2/3?
They didn't give us any of the breakdowns. Other counties told us how many sites. So of all the other counties that reported the number of sites, it's 194 early voting sites that they're planning on. So I don't know the number of sites New York City is planning on. They didn't give us that detail.
Okay.
They just said it'd be 103 million.
Well, they have 35 at a minimum, and a lot of the sites don't have any requirement for e-poll books because they're so small. They're just doing one early voting site at
Outside
the
of New
County
York
Board
City.
of Elections outside of New York City, so,
So you're saying a lot of the upstate counties are going with one site?
yeah.
And some had a zero in, so we called those counties to see, are you still working? Some counties with zeros are still evaluating e-poll books. So
For example, one of them was Albany, which will add a substantial number to their amounts. Bob, you would give that to me for late night reading, and I would do the math on those.
So we've coded the report where the county, Columbia, said we're not using e-poll books this year, so we stopped waiting for a number to update their zero. Others, if you're a zero and you're not highlighted in yellow, that tells the staff we're still waiting on that.
Well, that's
And
always shared
the
with
people
all
we're
the
sharing the
counties so they could
information with.
see what the other counties were doing and get a sense of where they stood in relation to their neighbors.
And we've shared that information with the Senate, the Assembly, the divisional budget. Those are the groups that asked us to, get a number in the first place. We've shared it with all the counties to make sure that we have whatever they want us to have correctly. So we continue to update those numbers. From the staff level on early voting, I know we have a number of teams that are working on a number of items. They'll probably go through them in the unit report. But I know Todd and I have worked with, it's a very small group. It's Schenectady County and Monroe County have been kind of models on how do the Dominion systems work for early voting, or how do the ES&S systems work for early voting. So we can at least go through Article 7, Article 8, and Article 9. How do you make a ballot? How do you run the election? And how do you close the polls? So we can look at what do the systems allow us to do? What does the law require us to do? And where do we need to put something into the regulations? So we've gone through Article 7 and 8. We're trying to schedule Article 9, but a number of things have come up this week, so we don't have that scheduled yet, where we can actually look at what do we need to do next. So that's been very helpful, I think, to all of us to get those documents and to start trying to think of where do we need to ask you to provide clarity in a regulation. I know Counsel has come up with an initial draft of early voting regulations, shared them, got comments back, but there's still some placeholders in for the operational team, putting together some, physical security related items. So from our estimate, we hope to have those done in the next week to 10 days in a better form to share with you, get out comments to the county so that at your April meeting, the counties could have previewed the draft that we're giving you, given us their preliminary comments, so that perhaps you'll be in a position to move forward with them at the April meeting.
What are the security placeholders that you are contemplating at this point?
I think we're looking at physical security of the early voting sites related to, the voting machines, the ballots. What do we require to be physically secure within the polling site?
I don't know that it's any different than what we do now, because it's a poll site, so there are existing security measures for what gets secured on site, so it's a question of, depending upon how, the site, what you leave on the site. Day to day, it would be unlikely you'd be taking the scanner back, but some counties might, and that's fine too. But if it's secure, if it's staying on site, many deliver machines before the election day now, so those same security protocols will be in place. The difference now is you're going to have to remove ballots at a certain point because the box will fill up over 9 days. So, but there's a security provision in place for that. So a lot of these measures we already have in place. It's hard to imagine what would be different for early voting other than this constant day-to-day. What are you going to do every day? How are you going to secure those? But it's really just envisioning how that works and giving the flexibility for those counties depending upon how they're secured. For example, if your early voting site is your own offices, the County Board of Elections offices, presumably you have security for that now. You have your locations for securing your ballots, so you could just wheel the machine into your bipartisan locked secure room and you've taken care of that. But if you're leaving it at a private site, then depending upon the logistics of that, you have to consider, as you do now, if you deliver a machine early, what are you securing it in until the time of election? New York City, for example, has this cart, for lack of a better term, where the supplies, when they're delivered early, are all inside that. That is a secure cart, in a locked room, and then if the seals are broken, you'll know that they're tamper-evident seals, and it's like, oh, don't use that because the seal's been broken. Bring in a new cart. So it's the same process. The different security that we have to add, that has to get added, is early voting allows for the counting of ballots prior to election close of polls. Beginning at 8 o'clock, you can start count the ballots. So one of the things we've certainly had to put in the regulations is people have a right to be at that because you are canvassing votes. It is a transparent process, but the problem is that they have to remain, maybe for lack of a better term, incommunicado, because those results should not get released prior to the close of actual polls.
Cannot get released.
Cannot get released. So, you have to allow people in, but on the other hand, they shouldn't be able to communicate out in any way. Like, they can't put notes on the window saying, hey, my candidate won. They can't text things out. I don't know if you want to take all their cell phones away, put them in a Faraday cage so they can't communicate out electronically. That's a new wrinkle to the process, because right now canvassing's open, it's open to the public, it's transparent, everybody hears the results at the same time. That's a big wrinkle with this one.
Have them sign a...
Confidentiality. That's an idea. I certainly, the term that I've used is incommunicado, but that would be, you'd need to keep a log of who's there.
Almost like the assistants oath, where you raise with
those
them.
are
Yeah, the inspectors and, the public officials have a sworn oath to follow the law and the regulations. As a condition for a watcher to be present, they should acknowledge the
Yeah, your candidates and your
The
watchers,
requirement.
don't have that, may not have, are
What
not
was
under
the,
the same
what
legal
was the
obligation.
point of the 8 o'clock opening?
So that you can finish, at a reasonable time to get the closed poll done for each of the 9 days of early voting.
And that's one of the things we're trying to figure out is, well, if you put thousands of ballots on a stick, either one stick that you reused every day, or you replace sticks, multiple sticks, time and again, how long would it actually take to run those? Right now, Schenectady is actually running an experiment. They're running ballots, thousands of ballots through 2 machines and taking the sticks out every day, and then they have one set where they're keeping it. So at the end of this week, that'll be the end of their 9-day voting period. They're going to say, well, how long will it actually take to extract the results out? We expect it will be increased, but we're not sure how long it will be. So they're actually running an experiment to help us with that.
And Monroe County already did it using the Dominion system so that we would at least get real experience from a test. How would we utilize the equipment we currently have to accomplish early voting? The other part, which I think is also part of the security, is the statute is written from the point of view where one team of inspectors starts the day and ends the day, and signs documents that speaks to how did I find the machine when I arrived, how did I leave it at the end of the day. And with 9 days of early voting, we have to make sure that the paperwork and right now our procedures that we require, reporting at the beginning and the end of the day is at least updated. Is the inspectors at the end of the day also preparing the early morning report for the group that's coming in tomorrow? So in addition to saying, I left it this way today, there has to be a way to verify when the inspectors come in tomorrow for the second day of early voting.
Plus, there's a provision that they can continue to use the same machine on Election Day.
Right, so we have to so that's where, from a security point of view, are there nuances, and that's why we're going through, what does the statute require in Article 8 and Article 9, and where do we see a need for clarification, most likely in either regulation or our procedure to wait what we need to do. So I think it's been very helpful. I think the work we've had of a small group of the counties just to get to step 1. As we develop a little bit more information, we expect to share that with the counties very soon so that they have the ability to give us their feedback before we give it to you, or at the same time we give it to you, so that we all have the benefit of their feedback. Did we miss something that should be in here?
I think we jumped ahead on early voting.
Okay.
We also are working with OGS. We had an initial in-person meeting to try and get e-poll books on a procurement path. We raised it during our call with them last Wednesday and have had a number of email back and forth with OGS to try and get people in a room to, even though we don't have a law yet, we're assuming the version we have, and I know taking the lead on e-poll book analysis in the agency has been operations from their team of people with the assistance of IT and others to come up with both a security requirement, technical security requirements, and the functional requirements of e-poll book for the point of view of an approval process that we would have to follow. So they're working to establish that. And we're working with OGS to try and come up with a way to get a contract in place so the counties can purchase a central state contract with as many vendors as want to bid on items.
There we go.
We did put a sign in that room, stop turning that light off.
Well, it's not a power.
I think it's just a sensor in the petition room, too, that it'll go off automatically.
Oh, okay.
It's in the petition room.
We have a ticket in with
there we go.
OGS.
Well, maybe Gerald went.
We haven't found the sensor for my office yet.
Sorry.
So let's assume that the budget bill contains the e-poll book legislation, and that we'll see that bill on April 1st or so. What would be the timeline of the steps we would need to put in place our procedures for approving e-poll book equipment, and I guess Tom and Brendan can go into what their preparations are for that. Is it realistic, for example, that the board would be able to have the approved vendors determined within 2 months, say June? And then what would be the procurement process after that? And what I'm leading to is it realistic for counties to be planning on using e-poll books for November?
Well, working backwards, the early voting starts in October, end of October. So that, in our analysis, and based on what counties have told us, they would like to see, in order to do their training for their poll workers, they need any system like this, electronic poll books, in July. Okay, that's reasonable, July, end of July, August, but in the July period. So assuming that means you have to go backwards from there in order for a delivery to be, a machine poll book to be built. The delivery times from the vendors will vary, but it's anywhere from a month to 6 weeks. So that puts me back to June into May.
Yeah, but they can always go with the approved list directly to the vendor.
Well,
They don't have to buy off our
what we
contract.
did, we encountered the same problem when we did the voting machines. So the way we structured that contract was, the contract was led about the same time we were doing the approval process. And it had a two-step procedure in there. If you wanted to sell a device, you went through the procurement list, and there's a lot of protocol that they have to go through anyway. But the second step, you can get on the contract, but the only way you can sell is being approved by the State Board of Elections. So that ordering late May or early June. So in order to get this running, we would anticipate having the contract done shortly into April. But as to Kim's point is, that's only one way to purchase the device. Our approval process is going to start, assuming the law gets passed in April, that we should have that up and running and approved, I think, in that 2-month window. Right around the time you'd be ordering, we would be approving them.
So are you suggesting that it's conceivable that you could use e-poll books?
If the stars align, it's possible.
Yeah, but I don't.
But that's what would be required. that
But
it-
you don't need
You
the
wouldn't want
contract
a
in order to
plan.
use them. No, I think you'd have the approval, you wouldn't have the state contract in
Right.
place. And that's the difference.
After people saw you testify in Westchester, we got an awful lot of calls because you indicated that e-poll books would not be allowed. And-
I said I was skeptical.
Right, so they're approving a list based upon a category. I think their approved vendors are going to be done shortly after the budget, from what I understand, shortly after the budget passes.
In April.
So if you have a list of approved vendors, if I'm New York City, I don't have to buy off the state contract. I can go directly to the vendor.
So you would approve the vendors without a testing process? Or a state board review process?
Well, they're reviewing it now. They're reviewing now. They have hundreds of qualifications, and they've had vendor demonstrations, and
You'd probably have an approved list in May sometime.
There would be an evaluation process that would include a number of our requirements, both functional and technical, and we'd still have to get to the point where we would approve a device for use. I think that might be, could that happen outside of the procurement, at the state procurement level, is the other question. So if we can just go through our normal evaluation process where we're testing these devices to our requirements, then theoretically we could have an approved list of vendors that if a state procurement's ready, they can buy off the state contract. If it's not ready, they could conceivably
And you
go
think
direct.
that can be done by June?
I think that based on the work that we've been doing on the requirements and that we're hoping to try to get those wrapped up in the next couple of weeks. We're trying to figure out the actual process of testing. We did look to, as part of our security testing, we were,
My question was,
do I think?
when you think what I'm trying to do is give the world
They have to
a
get it done by
realistic
June.
assessment of whether they should be hoping to use, whether they should be planning to use e-poll books, whether they should be hoping to try for e-poll books, or whether they should postpone introducing the e-poll books to the April primary. And what's realistic? And you know, as I said, when I was in Westchester, I just said I'm skeptical.
You work the timeline backwards. I listened, yeah.
Yeah, okay. And all I'm trying to do now is have an open discussion so that the counties can understand our thinking on this, of which of those three categories is doable or realistic, so that they can incorporate that into their planning.
Right. I think that as far as and Brendan's free to comment on this, I think that as far as our requirements and figuring out a testing process and being able to test vendors, do I think that we'll be prepared to do so in order to have approved vendors by June? Yes. I mean, that partially depends on the vendors coming in, and if they're ready to go and hit the ground running, once we have everything ready to go as far as the evaluation process.
But you're thinking you'd be able to say, this is an approved vendor by June?
Yes.
Okay.
Do you agree?
And so then, if that's the case, then it really comes down to procurement and vendor delivery time.
Right.
And that's why we wanted to have a state contract, knowing, as Kim said, a county could do their own individual purchase. Some counties, if they're only buying
What many
a few
counties are doing
machines for
too,
early
is they're
voting
looking
would be
for other states where
under a
where the
number.
main vendors are, in anticipation that some of the main poll book vendors will be approved, and they're getting contracts from those other states, and they're getting prepared to piggyback off those in the event that 1 through 5 is approved. So the counties are being very proactive, because many of them think they cannot do it effectively without them. So they are working in anticipation. They know who we've reviewed. We know who they've looked at. They know what other states have approved these, Texas, California, wherever. They're looking for contracts there to piggyback for their local procurement in the event our state procurement doesn't come through.
Some counties are also doing pilot programs right now with individual vendors in smaller elections, whether it be a village or they may have a special election for one seat to get that may only have a couple hundred voters depending on where it is, but at least to get something tested where the commissioners and the staff can see how everything works. So as opposed to just doing a show and tell when the vendor comes in, they actually have some kind of real life experience.
And in terms of fair competition, then, I mean, does the vendor community know that they should be in touch with you now?
We've been doing demos. We've done demos with 7 different vendors, which is really the majority of the kind of universe that's out there. We continue to look, and if anybody else comes in, we'll have the same kind of conversation with them. But, you know, looking at the landscape that's out there as far as the different devices and how it's kind of handled and how they communicate with different systems. So we've been doing that as part of our kind of development of guidelines.
And so how many vendors do you anticipate would have systems that could be approved by June?
What do we meet with? 8, 9 so far?
Well, I think for the e-poll book vendors, we've met with 7. So as far as how many would be approved, it would, at a minimum, probably 4-ish. I mean, do I think that all of them would pass the test? It's hard to say, because when we were talking with them, we didn't have our requirements to say, well, these are going to be all of our requirements. Can you pass all of these? You know, we did check with them to say, like, you know, were you certified in some of these other states that require certification? Most of them, quite honestly, operate in a very similar fashion. They're mainly all like tablet-based, or maybe 1 or 2 that are more software-based that could be run on a laptop or otherwise. And some of our security requirements are really going to be dependent upon that hardware. Whether you're running a laptop, and if you're running a laptop, are you running Windows, or you're running Linux, or you're running a minimized version? How is that system hardened to protect it from outside, interference? So I wouldn't be able to say whether or not all of them would be able to get through our criteria. Looking at what states have the criteria that we've been looking at, and that ranges anything from like Alabama to California to Virginia, Ohio.
Los Angeles.
There really is quite a difference as far as how in depth they go. Do I think that our requirements are more onerous than, let's say, Indiana? I don't necessarily think so, but we're certainly not going to be as easy as, let's say, some other states that only have a few requirements that really don't go into like testing. I think we're trying to do our due diligence in making sure that we're doing a robust review of these devices, but being mindful of the time frame in which we can kind of execute the evaluation.
So there's no national certification process like there is for voting machines?
No.
Has the EAC looked at this as something they would take on like they did voting machines, or is this not being even talked about?
Right now, all they really have on their website is kind of links to other states'
So they're leaving it to individual states to develop their own.
The Help America Vote Act includes the certification process for the Election Assistance Commission, and it provides only for certification of voting systems, and the definition of voting system does not include the
That's why without a bill, they could
poll
have
book.
bought one and used it as long as they used the paper poll book. The delay in the legislature is really negatively affecting them in the sense that there's a requirement. If it wasn't passing through the legislature, they could purchase an electronic poll book as long as they print the paper copies of the poll books for the site. Now we have a bill coming through that requires certification by us. So that delay, coupled with that extra requirement, I know, for example, New York City has looked at 8 or 10 vendors. They're picking 4 or 5. They're trying to find other states that contracts they can piggyback off in the anticipation that 1 or 2 or 3 may be approved by us, and then they're going to execute based upon that. So Dutchess has done that. So I know that it's a wrinkle that the legislature is delaying.
But if they're certified, they won't have to use the paper too.
Correct.
No, they have to have a.
Oh, they will.
No, there has,
They have
the
to
statute
have
requires
a redundant something.
some site of redundancy.
So you're-
unless it's amended in the budget bill.
I see. So the certification will not relieve the counties of their current obligation to use paper in addition to the electronic.
Well, it changed
Some
it.
redundant.
It should.
Unless it's a
changed it.
statutory
There's no
change.
requirement now for certification.
Right.
So the counties can buy an electronic poll
understand
book
that.
system as long as they keep the paper signature.
Right.
The proposed legislation would do 2 things, several things. First of all, it would eliminate the requirement for the paper,
Oh,
for the
would.
hard copy.
Okay.
And it would require, I think they're using the word approval rather than certification.
I do too.
For electronic
It's
poll books,
correct,
it is approval.
approval.
And then, of course, we anticipate that it'll provide funding.
Okay, so the bill would relieve them of this obligation.
What's normally spoken to about the paper is that as part of the requirements of the current language, we would have to develop, and the state board has to develop minimum security requirements for the devices, and we have to come up with an approved list for the devices. We would also have to develop minimum security requirements for the networks in which they connect to, and we have to figure out some process of certifying that the connections that are being used, in this case, the early voting sites, follow our minimum network requirements. So that would be another process that we have to figure out.
These will be tied to the internet as opposed to our voting machines.
Correct.
Is that correct? So there is that security element that the
But they
voting
won't,
machines
they
don't
won't
have.
be tied into the election systems.
Right, they would still be segregated from the actual election, the voter registration systems.
Okay.
But the last thing that was in the language was that the state board would have to figure out basically a redundancy plan, like a backup. So should all the technology fail, what would you have as a backup? Like, so it could conceivably be a paper list, albeit in a possibly compressed format. So, for example, Illinois basically prints a backup copy of their poll book, but really, really small and fits a lot more names on the screen just in case, for some reason, all of the e-poll books go down and I have no technology, no way of checking in voters. At least I can pull out this smaller print, but paper poll book that I can at least continue on the operations of checking voters in.
I see. And the status of this legislation is?
It passed the Senate on February 27th. It is printed in the Assembly One-House budget bill. It is in the governor's Article 7 bill, but it hasn't passed or been signed yet.
So it sounds like it'll be done in conjunction with the budget?
If it's done.
Anticipation?
Correct.
Whenever that might be.
Okay.
Very helpful discussion, I thought. And it looks like we have really advanced the ball down the field quite a bit since the last meeting.
Okay, is there anything else from the,
I think just the last thing that was on my list was New York State updated the appointees to the Federal Election Assistance Commission Standard Board, and the two previous appointees remain. Commissioner Kellner is the state representative from us, and on the Republican equivalent is the local representative, Rachel Bloodeye, the commissioner from Albany County.
okay,
And the next
Well,
standards board
congratulations.
meeting is April 9th.
okay. Anything you wanted to report on that? You've been on that board for quite a while, right?
I have been now, and the Election Assistance Commission is finally got 4 commissioners for the first time in 6 or 7 years, and has put out for publication version 2.0 of the voluntary voting system guidelines, which provide a more flexible system for certification testing by the Election Assistance Commission. Rachel and I both voted against the initial draft because it did not include a requirement that there be a voter verifiable paper audit trail as a condition for certification. And that has not changed. But if you compare the 2.0 version to the guideline that's currently in effect, which is 1.1, there are significant improvements. So that's a tough issue when they're leaving out a key component that I think is fundamental to voting machines. But objectively, this version is better than the existing version, so we'll see what happens at the next meeting.
Okay. Anything else? All right. Then any other questions for the directors? No? We'll move on to the counsel's office.
Thank
Tim
you.
Galvin and Brian Quayle.
Thank you, Commissioner. I mean, what I'm about to say seems general, but we have been very busy. It reminds me of a even year petition time. I don't know what's happened, but something has overtaken the board to create havoc in busy times. So we finalized the updates to the various training and advisory materials regarding the LLC changes. That was effective 7 days after the legislature passed it. There's been several follow-up questions on that. We're working through them, trying to get the filers answers. We've begun the outreach to the filers regarding the new Capus Fides system, requirements that they're going to have to provide to us in order for us to better serve them and for them to make their filings. All the compliance staff has attended IT training and review on the new system. We've tried to anticipate new unit needs that is going to result from the new filing system. For example, all the local filers. What are we going to do now that we have them all uploaded, and how are we going to review them, and how many people it's going to take to review them, and all of these things contingent on budgets and things like that. We've reviewed the January filings. We've exchanged drafts on an opinion regarding loans and debts and forgiveness of the same. That's not quite ready for today, if ever. We've done the regulation filing of the paperwork on the cross-county registrations that we've discussed, and the 16-year-old pre-registration that you did at the last meeting. We've worked with IT and met with IT, and IT has developed a way to remove the watermark off the signatures for the cross-county voter registrations that's required for the the new county, to accurately view the signature attached to a voter registration file. We've participated in the calls, the county calls, and the specific call on the cross-county registrations. We have drafted our annual report and given it to Mr. Conklin so we don't get in trouble at this particular meeting. We have, obviously, we've participated in and discussed and exchanged drafts on the early voting topic and the poll book topics that we've discussed. We've processed an unbelievable amount of FOILs and subpoenas within the with the Public Information Office. We finalized the training unit schedule contingent upon budget finalization that Bob wrote in big red letters across the top of it. And we've monitored the legislative activity for more possible legislation that could be headed our way, because before we used to say if it both passed both houses, we would get calls on it. Now, no matter what appears on any agenda in any house, the phones start ringing, and we try to hold people off, but anything can pop out as they've proven at any time. So it's taken a great deal of time to, anticipate, okay, public finance is off, it's on, it's off, it's on, what'll it take, what'll it cost? So we've spent a great deal of time doing those sorts of things.
But that's important, right? Because,
Yeah, it's just
we
before.
We want people to be
Before we
calling.
would have a better idea. Now we have no idea whatsoever. Then we have all of the regular litigation that we're handling and monitoring. We've responded to Sugarman versus the New York State Board of Elections, and we're waiting for our oral argument to be set on that. And I think that's about it. Brian?
I am not going to add anything. That was very thorough. Thank you very much.
You've been busy,
We've been busy.
and we have a lot to do.
We do.
To implement early voting
And everything else.
electronic.
I understand
votes
there's a
and-
hearing tomorrow on public financing.
We were invited yesterday, and Todd and I are preparing to testify tomorrow. So if anybody wants to watch, the webinar starts at 1. I'm not,
Who's having the
last
hearing?
time we ended up about
Senate.
7:15.
Senate elections.
Senate elections.
Hopefully we're on earlier.
Hopefully we'll be earlier, while the sun's still out.
Like I said, it's like a even year heart of petition time. We are moving.
Well,
It's
that's
good.
coming too.
Pardon me?
That's coming too.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Bob. Thanks for that.
Anybody have any questions?
And what is the date for filing petitions?
April 1st
April
through April
1st and
4th.
4th.
So,
April Fool's.
April Fool's Day.
I'd wait till the 2nd.
Okay. No more questions. We'll move on to election operations. Tom Conley and Brendan Laval.
Thank you, Commissioner. As was already mentioned, we did receive notification of a resignation in the 57th Senate District. That was sent out to the 4 counties that comprise that district back on March 11th. From a voting machine standpoint, as far as certification goes, with the ES&S, they did finally submit the remaining source code changes that they were doing to SLI on Friday was the last submission. So at this point, we'd be waiting for SLI's report on the source code. We are still in conversation.
this is for the certification of the ES&S.
The Express Vote XL.
Vote XL.
Yes. We are still awaiting a revised version of their TDP, or the technical data package. We've been having conversations about some of their language about covering proprietary materials and haven't been satisfied yet with what they come back with. So we are expecting a revised version, I think, in the near future. With regard to Dominion, we did receive 2 de minimis change orders from SLI, one for the addition of a plastic ballot box and one for a sleeve that could be mounted on the ImageCast Evolution or the ICE machine. Staff has also been in contact with both SLI, the testing lab, and also NYSTEC, who we use as an independent security consultant regarding the potential security issue that was raised by Commissioner Kellner in his memo, which I believe will be discussed under new business. Clear Ballot, we are finishing up the test case work for their upgrade submission. They will be on site tomorrow as part of that process. Regarding cybersecurity, we continue to be involved in the conversations with Grant Thornton and NYSTEC and OGS about the various security initiatives and procurements. We have been working with NYSTEC as far as revising the security incident response policies and procedures. So we kind of got a little waylaid on some of the other things we've been working on, but we'll be getting back to that shortly. Miscellaneous, we did, at the request of the commissioners from the last meeting, we did send a letter to the New York City Board making ourselves available to help in facilitating some sort of resolution to the issue regarding the additional translators at the poll sites. We've been working with the voting machine vendors, and as was mentioned before, both Schenectady and Monroe counties regarding some of the early voting, I'll say, testing. We've also been doing a lot of testing internally just to kind of run the machines through different scenarios, understanding the limits of the different portable memory devices, the time that it takes to run certain tapes, run certain reports, just so that we can kind of have the answers proactively to the questions that the counties might have as they go forward in coming up with their own plan for early voting. As was also discussed, we've been working a lot on requirements for electronic poll books. We've been doing research with what other states have been doing. We've been developing our own requirements, both from a security standpoint, but also from a functional requirement standpoint, trying to figure out what our evaluation process would be for these devices. We've also been working on the network requirements that the current language makes us responsible for coming up with. We've been also looking at ballot on demand devices, just to kind of also get an understanding of what that landscape looks like, understanding the interconnectedness at times with some of the e-poll books, trying to figure out if that raises any additional security requirements for electronic poll books, or what other things we might have to be thinking about with regard to the ballot on demand systems. They were mentioned in one of the House's budget bills, but unlike electronic poll books where we have kind of current language to go on what is going to be expected of us to develop, we don't have the same with regard to ballot on demand printers. So we're just trying to become as familiar with them as possible, so that once the language came out, if there's any additional requirements of the state board, we would be positioned to kind of move forward with that.
New York City already uses ballot on demand printers for its absentee ballots. Are you familiar with that system?
Yes.
And are there other counties using ballot on demand printers at this time?
For absentees, there's several print their own.
Who or how many?
I think Washington prints their own for absentees. Schenectady prints their own for, you say on demand. I guess it's not necessarily one in print a ballot for them, but they do print in-house a certain number. So,
Well, I know a lot of counties do in-house printing, but there's no legislation that I'm aware of that would require us to certify or approve the ballot on demand printing systems.
correct.
No, but there is a stub issue with the
Yeah, why don't you talk about the stub issue?
I don't know enough about it, except for everyone says there's a stub issue, and the current law requires that the ballots be stubbed and numbered, and the ballot on demand printers don't have stubs.
Yeah, election day ballots are treated differently than absentee ballots. So absentee ballots don't require a stub, because it's the purpose of the stub is to reconcile the number of ballots that were produced, the number as compared to the number of voters who signed into the poll book, as compared to the number of ballots that are actually in the machine. So it's a check. It's actually a critical internal control to determine whether or not there are too many ballots in the box.
Well, the issue is whether it's a critical internal control, right?
Well, it's a control we have,
Right.
because that's one of the, in the stub.
Right now, New York is the only state that requires the stubs.
So 7-1063 of the statute requires the perforation and a stub.
My
and-
question was, why can't you have a stub of blank ballots? Take one piece of paper off and put it through the on-demand printer.
So
But many of the on-demand printers provide other logs of what their ballot accountability is. I know the operation unit has been reviewing what are the features of on-demand systems with our existing procedure that we use for ballot accountability above and beyond the stubs. And I think we would hope to get together very soon after they've concluded their review of those systems. And I know they've been meeting daily to catch up with all of them. So hopefully this week we'll be completed with that and we can sit down. But I think we would recommend amending 7106 to provide an exclusion for other accountability that may be able to satisfy the stubs.
But if the stubs
But that
not
would go to the
changed, Kim's
legislature.
correct. You could have a book of stubs, pull out the ballot, indicate which ballot you were printing, because each ballot, the machine can print individual ballots, that's the beauty of it, and then print that ballot one at a time, which is what you're doing anyway.
Hopefully they fix it.
That would account for the paper used, but it wouldn't account for the particular ballot style.
The stub would have to
You'd have
indicate
to
which
keep a
ballot
log.
style, what you're.
You have to write on the thing.
On the
So it-
stub or log.
Many states, as you know, as has been mentioned, have managed to provide robust ballot accountability without the stub. And it does seem that while certainly there are options that may include the stub, it would probably be a very value-added change to the election law to allow alternatives that are just as robust in terms of ballot reconciliation if the legislature would be inclined
However-
to take that up.
However, at the late date, to create anything robust, I'm now back in the corner of, are we gonna have enough time?
Right. Well, see, I'm glad you mentioned it, because I think that if there is a consensus on how to address this, and it sounds like this is one of the issues that needs to be on the agenda for trying to form a consensus on what is the appropriate way to do this, then we need to tell the legislature sooner rather than later, in hopes that they can tweak the
What's New
legislation.
York City doing?
They're waiting
They're
for the
waiting
stub
for our answer.
resolution.
Aren't they already doing this?
No, just absentee, it
Just
doesn't have the
absentee.
stub
So the question
requirement.
is, can they do it for early voting?
They don't believe so.
Not as the
Not
statute is
without,
currently.
not without a
As
fix.
not as statute is
Change.
currently written.
So the issue is, it sounds like we are not ready to
We don't have-
recommend legislation
Not at this point,
today.
not today.
But is it conceivable that we could do it for the next meeting?
Oh, I think
That we can draft it, that
we
we
might
can
be
get
able
a
to share it with
consensus
you and
on
maybe
that?
have a quick phone call if we need it sooner. I think it would, if we're going to be doing this so that the devices could be purchased, I mean, generally, the legislature's going to do the budget between now and April 1st, but as soon as the budget's over, we should be prepared to have, a recommendation.
Unless it's in the budget and we missed the boat.
Well,
The stub isn't going to be in the budget.
It's not.
Not that
I
I'm
think this is a
aware of.
post-budget item.
It's
I
not in
think.
any of the budget language now, so.
I think it's a post-budget and
The
because.
feedback I'm getting is they're waiting for us. But if there is consensus from us, I think that there's a strong likelihood that we could get the bill passed promptly. But they're waiting for a consensus from us. And I think it's important that there be a bipartisan consensus
didn't
on
know
that
that.
issue.
None of us knew that, huh? Over here.
Pardon?
We didn't know they were waiting for something from us. I was waiting for
Well,
them.
they is, a very amorphous term.
That waiting. is
I
not-
have that.
that's
I
not
haven't
making
spoken
any-
with 213 members of the legislature, but
I didn't know anyone was waiting for us.
Didn't know that at all.
But we can, we'll just,
Right.
Put that on the
One of the
list.
things I'd like to just mention on it, if I can, is that, in terms of what the actual solution is that is the alternative to the stub is one question.
Right.
But the legislative authorization to have something that is equivalent to the stub it could theoretically be a very simple tweak to the actual statute. The actual answer may be a little more complicated.
That's
But
right.
the legislative fix could actually potentially be quite simple.
right.
I agree.
so the goal is to try to get.
Nothing is simple.
How do counties accommodate
simple.
early voting without on-demand?
They would have to have,
If they have every
Piles
ballot
of
available,
every
right? They
ballot
have to have
style.
security
So that's why they're
for-
gonna have to divide up, and they're gonna have to chunk up their
I mean, isn't
counties.
there a high
Or-
incentive
Send
here to allow ballots on
Yeah.
demand? Because if we don't, the ability to deliver early voting is severely compromised, not to mention the security issues of keeping these ballots
I think the biggest
secure
issue
during that-
is-
during that 10-day period.
I mean, the smaller counties can
Yes.
accommodate 20 ballot styles if that's what they have, 20 towns, small number of EDs. But once you get beyond a 20, and more importantly, when you get to next year with primaries in each different party, that you also have to have a separate ballot
Well,
for.
not-
It makes it very difficult to anticipate that you will be able to have one ballot for every option you have, so any voter who comes into your early voting site, you can service them, and then how many show up.
Right, and not to mention, the legislation itself provides that if you can't agree, and we have no indication that this is happening out there, if you can't agree on the number of sites, every site must provide every ballot style. You can't do that without,
Yeah.
in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, you're really compromising early voting if you don't have it, because
Yeah.
you're going to have to limit a site
Yeah,
to
you
a
gotta chunk
specific
'em up to
geographic
specific
area
EDs, right.
to realistically accommodate those
And
number
from
of
what I
ballots.
can see, we're the only state that has perforation numbered stubs. It's a holdover from Tammany Hall days when the parties were handing out the ballots and accountability issues were
Well, there was just a mob.
were some issues, certainly. But we already have a number of ballot accountability procedures in addition to numbered stubs, and that's why operations has really been looking at the ballot on demand systems that are out there to be able to clearly understand what are the features and what, because they provide additional logs of what was, entered into the system as far as activity and what was printed per ED or per ballot style. That may help us to come to a understanding that it's an equivalent, it's an equal security.
I know we're talking about opposite issue, and I'm sorry for that, but one of the things that came up today that is the most pause for me is the robust styles of reconciliation that other states have. I personally have not looked at any of them, so that would be, that we're all of us together would have to agree on the robust style of reconciliation before we could come up with a recommendation to just remove the stub, I would think.
Well, or you could write the legislation saying that you
We'll
can
develop-
remove the stub if you have agreed procedures. But I think the consensus then is, though, that you should spend some time on this issue and try to see if you can come up with legislation that we could propose to the legislature.
Well, for the only state requiring the stubs, it seems every other state has found a way to accommodate this need without the stubs. It shouldn't seem to me to be too difficult to come up with one that other states have used and it's acceptable, and I mean, we shouldn't have to reinvent the wheel here. It seems we must have models out there that are
It seems everything's more difficult these days, but I agree
fair
with
enough.
you.
I understand that, but I'm just saying, I don't think this is, something that's never been looked at before. It's unique to New York, and we have to somehow invent something. I would think there's something out there we could use as a template.
Yes.
I agree.
I agree.
And I guess the point is that the feedback I'm getting is that the legislature would be responsive if there's a bipartisan agreement on how to do this.
Yeah, and I think that most of the electronic poll book and ballot on demand systems that are kind of in the wild now already have certain functionality that addresses that, because they have to be, that has to be in place in order for these other states that have these other reconciliation methods. So it would not be like reinventing the wheel as far as the functionality goes. So I think we'll see that a lot of the tools that we might want to use in order to come up with whatever New York decides for reconciliation may already be in place.
Okay. Anything else for operations? Anything, Brendan? No? Okay, then we'll move on to NVRA PIO, John Conklin and Shel Kauser.
Thank you, Commissioner. The Public Information Office has been busy since the last meeting. Some of the hot topics include, as we discussed here, early voting, the cost of early voting, but the continuing changes to the signature requirements for the petition gathering period that's currently going on, electronic poll books, campaign finance, cybersecurity, the possibility of public financing of campaigns, and questions about the vacancy in the 57th Senate District. The unit has participated in the monthly ECA call in February, as Bob mentioned. We continue to be part of the meetings on cybersecurity and the implementation of the contracts on risk assessments and managed security services for the county boards. We processed 116 FOIL requests in February. Cheryl is managing the necessary translations that we're doing for all the forms that we've changed since the beginning of the year. We are expecting delivery of voter registration forms next week. We're working on the annual report, as Kim mentioned.
On the annual report, are there units that have not yet provided you with their drafts?
Yes.
We have not.
Well, I guess you have an excuse.
Thank you.
Whoa. We had an all-out 3-day effort on that.
So I'm also waiting for IT, and I'm also waiting for enforcement. Okay, so for the website, we also published a revised version of the political calendar. We published the 2019 campaign finance seminar schedule. We posted the regulations that we've passed here, 6214 contribution limit, 17.7 on the transfers, and 17.9 on the pre-registration of 16-year-olds. They're all on the website. And we posted the transcripts for the January and the February board meeting. For NVRA, since the last meeting, the team has visited Cortland, Herkimer, Montgomery, Wyoming, and Orleans counties for nice voter reviews. All those counties were found to be compliant. They traveled only 960 miles for those counties. Voter history is now complete for the 2018 general election in the nice voter system. There were a few cyber incidents and some connectivity problems that prevented some boards from finishing their voter history until last week. And one board had to reload their history for type because they had sorted their absentees and affidavits and election day ballots differently in the system, so they had to be taken down and reloaded. So, lastly, there's still some counties out there who have election training and state funds for capital improvements. We sent the contracts out. Most of them have come back, but I just want to remind them to send the copies back to us signed. So that is all that I have. I don't know if Cheryl has anything to add.
The only thing I would add is we continue to work on accessibility issues on our website, and we have our next meeting tomorrow to progress on that.
Okay, that's pursuant to the Eason lawsuit.
Any questions? Okay, thank you. And on to ITU, William Cross.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Start with projects. Capus Vitus, of course, development continues. Most recently, still on EFS and the back office functionality, including ballot access. Also working on the implementation of the new secure portal and the login and security requirements around that. We held a demonstration for the electronic filing functionality for the Treasurer's Work Group and public entities on March 6th. We received some good feedback from that. We're also scheduling demos and outreach for the vendor and county work groups. We have a demo scheduled for public reporting for the board for next week. We also continue efforts to fully staff the project. I reported last month that we identified a candidate for one of our programming positions. Of course, they accepted and later declined, so we are back. We're still in that mode. Nice Voter, the state board continues to work with the vendor to finish implementation for disaster recovery. We've scheduled testing for mid-April. That's the failover from our production data center to our disaster recovery site and back. The move, we're also continuing development in the in-house move application. We worked with the executive and the other units on development of the budget estimates for new legislation, as well as technical review of e-poll books. Accessibility, IT's worked with PIO and the other BOE units on meeting requirements of the accessibility lawsuit. We're developing projects and requirements for updating our current website applications, keen voter lookup and election night reporting, as well as encompassing some different updates in Capus Vitus to match those requirements, and currently working on remediation of a substantial number of PDFs that are currently on the website. In terms of security, secure elections staff continues to work with the county boards on recent cyber incidents. That seems to be the new normal. Since our last meeting, we had another county that encountered a cyber incident which necessitated bringing the nice voter connection down. And we've gone through the recovery efforts with that county.
What's the story behind that?
This particular county was Putnam. They encountered a cyber incident where an infection spread across multiple machines. In this case, election systems weren't directly impacted by that.
Excuse me, when you're talking about machines,
Servers.
I assume you're not talking about voting machines.
No, I'm sorry.
That's not possible.
No, sorry. So servers and workstations and PCs. Sorry.
And these were servers and PCs that had access to the system that the counties use for uploading voter registration transactions? Is that it?
Potentially. In many of the counties, it's not segregated, so it is segmented. It's all in the same. In this case, it did not. They had enough segmentation where it did not affect anything with elections, besides some centralized county services which were affected, but nothing, not the specific PC or voter registration systems. Out of abundance of caution, whenever we're made aware of any of the cyber incidents in any of the counties, we take the link to Nice Voter down. Because at that point, usually we don't know what the extent of the incident is or how it propagates or anything along those lines. We take our connection down.
Bill, how do you become aware of an incident at the local level?
Various methods. We do have a cyber incident response procedure we've asked the county boards to implement, where they contact DISHs first and us second. But we have heard through other means, previously through the boards, in which case we then have them go through these routine to make DISHs aware and make us officially aware.
So they notify us. There's a procedure where they notify
Yes.
us. We would not know it but for them notifying us, though. Is that correct? We don't have
Correct.
a way of determining it up here.
Not directly.
Okay.
Yeah. Unless we saw something directly, if we see a connection with their system down, usually we want it out on a daily basis anyways, and but that's not always by malicious means. That's, they could be doing routine maintenance work and things like that, but we usually will inquire. Our procedure, though, is to bring our connection down anytime we are made aware of it, and then we have a procedure for bringing it back up, and we do a full data offline audit of data and then online data audit, and require all password and credential changes on Nice Voter just to ensure that nothing was affected there, and it was a fresh start again. Putnam now, the one from this past month is Putnam. They are now back online. We also continue to work with the county boards, the other security efforts, of course, the risk assessment. 56 site visits have now been completed. Only Nassau and New York City are outstanding. And we received the first, just early this morning, we received the first risk assessment report for our review from Grant Thornton. The intrusion detection systems have now been installed in 54 counties across the state, providing significantly enhanced level of protection for the boards. We'll be working with the remaining counties to facilitate the remaining installations, or at least verifying that they have some existing IDS capabilities and don't need our offering, but we have to have those conversations. We're also working with the managed security vendor, Sedera, on the initial pilot counties for that project. There was some question about budget around that. I think we've worked with them, and we're moving ahead with the pilot counties there. As reported last month, we have our own risk assessment scheduled with the Department of Homeland Security for late July. And in the meantime, we're working on several security improvements of our own systems. The board also had a kickoff meeting with SUNY, Center for Technology and Government, on the Nice Voter Data Project. And the goal of that is to yield a solution to detect abnormalities in data as they're coming from county board systems, either any abnormal volume of transactions or changes in key data fields and things along those lines, and also provide us with some better metrics from existing data. We had a kickoff meeting to discuss the scope of that project. And of course, we're working on the annual report. And nothing remarkable to report about the website, normal post levels for post-election.
Any questions for? Okay, thank you. And last, we have Risa Sugarman on the agenda, although I note she's not here again today. I believe this is the third meeting she's missed. I believe it's in conjunction with the lawsuit. At least that's my understanding.
Has she told you that that's why she's not coming?
Yes.
She said that originally.
Is that still
For
true?
the first meeting.
That's still true.
And so, am I correct that in the last year, she has not made a single criminal referral?
That's correct.
And she has not made a single request for a subpoena in the last year?
Correct.
Yes.
December of 2017 was the last.
That was the last
request.
one. And what is the number of outstanding referrals to her that the compliance unit has made? It's a little over 3,000, as I recall.
It's somewhere in that neighborhood, Commissioner, and I normally bring that piece of paper with me, and I appear to have mislaid it, but that it is in that, it is in that ballpark.
Well, if you don't have it, you don't have it. But it's certainly in the thousands.
It's over
Yes.
2,500, I know that.
And were any new hearing officer proceedings commenced in the last month?
No.
And after the review that we did on the non-filers, I think she indicated to the co-executive directors that she was still reviewing it.
From the July 2018 non-filer report.
Right.
So we're not aware of anything that she has done with respect to enforcement in the last month, except suing the commissioners.
That would be accurate.
Thank you.
Well, all right. Thank you. So I guess with that, we'll move on to old business. Is there any old business to come before the board? I see none, so we'll move on to new business. And now we have two issues. Well, we did the early voting in large part, although we could talk more about it if you'd like. But we also have another item, the voting system security issue, which I believe Commissioner Kellner has brought up.
All right, so I have written a memorandum which spells out reports that two prominent computer science professors, Andrew Appel at Princeton and Richard D'Amelio at Georgia Tech, have pointed out as a potential point of attack on the Dominion ICE machine.
Which is a ballot marking.
Well, it's a combined ballot scanner and ballot marking device. Right. I reviewed the initial security threat assessment submission that the vendor was required to make with respect to their certification application. And it does not address that as a potential point of attack. And the SLI and NYSTEC reports to the commissioners also do not address that. So I am requesting that the Election Operations Unit examine that specific issue. And in particular, that we ask SLI and NYSTEC to provide us with additional reports or updated reports that address that explicit point of attack.
Okay, well, maybe we can get into a little more detail of exactly what we're talking about here. So there was a, as I understand it, there was a blog posting by a professor from Princeton, who raised some issue about the possibility of compromising, I guess, these machines. And I looked at the blog posting, which I guess was shared with all the commissioners, I believe. My understanding was his focus was on the ability of someone to potentially hack into the machine undetected and put some malware in to change the configuration. Am I
Yes.
characterizing this? So maybe you could speak to that a little bit as far as, now this is just so we all understand what we're talking about. This is a machine that was certified here in
October
of
last year.
2018. So it went through the process that we go through with any voting machine, which is to provide the machine to our tester, which is SLI on a national. They're one of the 2 approved voting machine testing agents approved by the AC. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And so it went through that, and then NYSTEC provided us with additional testing we wanted at the state level to certify the machine. It got approved at all those levels, and then we went ahead and certified.
Correct.
Is that a fair representation? Okay, so the issue raised by this professor, can you maybe elaborate a little bit on this so we get a better understanding of what we're talking about?
Sure. This the original, I think, post was back in October. And it was, I think, brought to at least our attention in toward the end of December when the Dominion added the ice machine to the central contract with OGS. And they brought it to our attention and said, have you seen this? And we responded back after contacting with the...
Just so we're specific, when you say, have you seen this, have you seen this blog?
Have you
from
seen this
October?
blog post?
Now
Yes.
we're talking about this in December, correct?
Correct, yes.
When we were about to certify it.
After we have already certified the
Certified
machine.
it, and it's already gone to the state.
Correct.
As
It's
approved.
already gone through and
Okay.
been certification. That was in October. The blog post happened at some point in October. I don't have the specific dates. In December, OGS contacted us and said, have you seen this? Do you have comments on this? And we responded back that the system, as certified, cannot do this. And then OGS said, okay, and they posted the system to the central contract. At that point, the counties were in discussion as far as purchasing the machine to update their fleet of older and aging machines in order to get this going. And then obviously it became a little bit more focused on getting new machines out once all the early voting bills started to pass, because a lot of the counties are going to need additional machines to help offset the load that they have on their machines if they have multiple sites for early voting or just want, have more machines that are out there. So we did prior to the last meeting, Commissioner Kellner came and asked for a overview of what the machine does and had questions related to this specific blog, and we did a run through of how the machine works and how the ballots go through the track.
What was the timing on that?
It was before the previous board meeting. So we did that. We went through the information as far as the ballot path and how the machine works. And then I want to say it was March 6th or 7th, the memo from Commissioner Kellner came citing this specific post and I guess the underlying issue is if someone were to blow by all the security provisions that we have in place, that the machine also has in place, and would replace the software, the firmware, get access to the actual EMS itself, which again, as we talked about before, is not connected to any internet. There's policies and procedures in place where this is separate at the board. In order to create the files and then replace software and firmware on each individual machine in order to come up with something that would make the machine, cause the machine to add additional marks onto someone's ballot. And I think that's where we are now, Tom.
And I think that the kind of issue that possibly wasn't part of our process in the past is that the machines that were in use before the ISO certified, the functionality of marking a ballot and then scanning the ballot have been physically segregated. On both the ICE and also the Express Vote XL, it would look from what we've been able to see from the technical specifications, or at least the diagrams that we've received, the printer and scanner in these devices share a similar ballot path. So whereas before, the issue of being able to exploit any sort of technical vulnerabilities in a device was...
Excuse me, when you're talking about they follow the same path, meaning it's a normal ballot as well as one, and as opposed to one that is marked by the machine? Is that what you're saying?
Theoretically, the device has one ballot path where both the scanner and the printer could be accessed, not as certified, but technically speaking, from a physical standpoint, there is one kind of loop. So
Not as certified.
So, I mean, whereas before there was a physical separation where if someone was doing a ballot marking session, they would put in their blank ballot or they would put in a blank piece of ballot paper and they would end up with a marked ballot that they would then go over to the optical scan and be able to either do an independent verification or just cast their ballot. The issue that seems to be somewhat unique to the newer systems that we're looking at, and as I said, it's both Dominion and ES&S, is that they're now kind of combined and self-contained. So there's no longer that physical separation. So even in the old Dominion, where you still had one kind of unit, you had a ballot marking, the printer came out, and you took that ballot, you walked around to the front, and you scanned it in. In this case, it's kind of an all-in-one.
Can I just add something quickly
Sure.
in there for our commissioners? That was done by Dominion to allow a disabled voter to actually have full ability to cast their ballot as well, as opposed to marking it and then having it print out and then have a poll worker walk around and scan it. For the privacy concerns and pursuant to a requirement, that's why it's an all-in-one.
No, that's my understanding was this was done in large part at the behest of the disabled community who felt that having the machines separate was
Right.
not accommodating, and that so this was designed to accommodate both the disabled voter and non-disabled voter on basically the same machine, so they would have the same experience voting. Is that fair to say? I mean, I don't think the vendor came up with this just on their own. This was done because of that concern.
That could very well be the case. Like I said, it seems to be with the current generation of voting machines, not just the one vendor, so that could very well be where the market's been pushing them. I think as part of this process, what we had done was when Commissioner Keller had first raised Professor Apple's concern, we simply went out to NYSTEC and SLI, both who had been part of the certification process, and asked them if they had looked at the specific allegation in his document to see whether or not they looked or did anything to see if this was addressed. Neither one of them said that this specific allegation was addressed. I think they both agreed that
Let's call it point of attack.
Okay. So this point of attack was not addressed in SLI security testing or in NYSEC's review of SLI's work, which is part of the certification process.
So when you say point of attack, Tom, what do you mean?
Well, trying to attack the voting system in order to facilitate the additional marking of a ballot once a voter has already either marked their ballot, whether by hand or by using the ballot.
I mean, as I read the professor's analysis, it was based largely on the design, that the machine has both the printer and the reader within the same machine, which was exactly what it was meant to do. Am I correct? That was the idea, was to accommodate both voters by having both of those devices contained in one machine.
But the security threat is that when the ballot is inserted into the scanner, that the ballot could pass through the printer, that the printer could add marks to the ballot, and have the ballot deposited in the ballot box without verification.
But is it
by
my
the voter.
understanding that that could only occur if there was some sort of intervention to the machine by an outside actor, that the machine is currently configured and is currently certified cannot do that? But if there was theoretically an outside actor given access to the machine.
Or an inside actor.
Okay, an actor,
Right.
inside potentially, I guess, but
and
they would have to have access to the machine in a manner that will allow them to actually invade the machine with physical devices with electronic devices to alter the way the machine
They'd have
works to
alter
allow
the
this?
software.
Have to, okay.
And the
But the-
hardware.
And
but
some
the-
hardware.
So no, you don't have to
Yes,
alter
you
the
do.
Would have to do with the printer.
No.
You would have to alter the software of the election management system and also the firmware on the machine. You would need to know some of the election information from the EMS in order to know what was being alleged is that I could see your ballot, figure out which contest you possibly didn't vote in, and then mark a choice for you that you were unaware of. And the only way you'd probably really be able to do that would be to know the grid work of the election ballot itself.
Maybe.
So I guess the
There are
term-
other possibilities.
The
See,
term point of
problem-
attack is, I think it's confusing because the point of attack would be getting at the machine. The marking of the ballot is the after effects of changing the software, firmware, and election management system, understanding which ballots are in there, whether they be from ED1 or ED20 or ED30 or what have you. Being able to then have the system read those and either overmark a ballot or fill in an undermarked ballot as it goes through. So I guess the point of attack is, at least as I understand it, would be access to the machine. The outcome of the access to the machine would be having the machine do things that it's not certified to do, and there's a number of different, like Tom said, things that would need to be changed. The cards that go into the machine, the hash checking of the machine and the cards.
How do you know that those are the only things that need to be changed when the reports didn't address that? From a technical point of view, how do you know that that's the case?
Well, in order to change the machine, then someone would have to get in there.
How do you know that the election configuration software could not be corrupted to trigger the mode that Geo explained to the Westchester County Legislature allows the ballot to directly go across the printer to the ballot box?
Well, the software could be configured to do that if someone put something in there to change the configuration of the software.
Right. So right now, the key safeguard that we have in place against that type of attack is the ultimate fact that there is a voter verifiable ballot, and we have an audit of the voter verifiable paper audit trail. But if that attack, this attack that we're talking about, where the ballot goes across the printer and then directly into the ballot box, should take place, there is no voter verified ballot, and the audit is now meaningless or has been defeated. So all I'm asking is that we have our experts review this issue and give us a report that can be reviewed by computer scientists and not by amateurs on whether, in fact...
We've had this, amateurs didn't look at this. Professionals have looked at this.
No,
and this guy,
no professional has looked at it.
Mr. Apple, we give him a lot of credit. All of a sudden we call it professor and Princeton, we're supposed to believe this guy. Look, this bottom line, as far as I'm concerned, this is a tempest in a teapot. Because what you really have here is a guy walking in, and he goes past security into a locked room. Excuse me, I'm here to do a job. And he grabs a hold of the computer physically, and he grabs a hold of a flashlight, and he goes into a corner someplace to not be disturbed for 5 or 6 hours as he grabs his screwdriver, unscrews the machine, takes a look, and you can take a look at here. All of these little devices here, rips them off, all the security things, rips them off, fiddles with his machine, comes back, he says, I got my thing in it, it's in there now, I have my little flash drive, and I put it in, and and he returns the machine. That's one machine in one ED out of thousands of machines in the entire state of New York. And we're supposed to now say, what? All of our security has prevented this, and that's why we looked at this. Tom's email back in December basically said, no, this is legit. There's no way you can get in there. So if you can't get in there to do this, what the heck are we talking about? It's a tempest in a teapot. In the meanwhile, the name of this company gets besmirched, I think, wrongly. I don't think it's appropriate. And I'm not carrying anybody's water here. All I want to know is, let's be fair. Let's be reasonable. Let's be honest. Our procedures are good. Our procedures are solid. And we have every single safeguard that you could possibly put into this thing. It would take, it's like Fort Knox. Can you get into Fort Knox? No, it's impossible. No, it's not impossible. If you have the right amount of people, spend the right amount of money, you can actually break it into Fort Knox and rob it. Take a lot to do it. Mission impossible. Saw it on television. Same thing here. It can't be done. The lot that's being done is minuscule. Minuscule. And how much of a vote are we talking about here? How many people are going to use this? How many corrupted ballots are we talking about? My understanding is that within the machine counts the number. Correct me if I'm wrong. Counts the number of times it uses the
printer engages.
The printer engages. So the printer engages 5 times. It should be 5. Be able to see 5 in an audit afterwards. If it doesn't, you already have your audit. You can see that something's amiss. But to me, it takes a phenomenal effort. Not some blogger with a professorial title sitting in a room playing a game to say, let's see how we can do this. Let's see, can we hack this in? Can we actually do this? Can we actually create software that I can put on my flash drive? If I get near the damn machine, stick it in there, let it go, and have the exclusivity of time of 5 or 6 hours to get this done? Ludicrous. So here we are discussing something, in my opinion, that's, again, a 10% of the teapot. You have people that have put hundreds of thousands of dollars and whatever else in research and so forth to present this to us. You know what? If you can look at Dominion, you may as well look at every single ballot marking device in the state of New York and question it all, because they're all vulnerable.
Now, can I speak?
End of speech. Yes.
I appreciate your passion. And you know, sometimes we even vote together.
A lot of time. Most of the time.
I look at this strictly from a decision-making point of view. And I point this at not exact similarity, but you got to look at this. The federal government, Boeing and everyone, certified an aircraft. And they went through a process greater than you can imagine ever in your mind in terms of here. A plane went down. They went through another process with that, saying all the kinds of things you said when they went through the process. And then another plane went down. Sat back and they said, everything's okay. We certified it. Even the president initially said it. All those planes are grounded now because no one knows what the real problem is. Now, going back to each one of the things we did here. The disabled community, someone mentioned that this machine was built for the disabled community, okay? I have 5 letters in here from disabled community telling us not to approve this machine. Here they are. Westchester Independent Living Center.
They're 4
Westchester
letters.
Disabled on the Move. Disabled Rights of New York with offices in Albany, Brooklyn, Rochester. And I think there's another one. But you get my point. Now, what I'm saying to you is, in my experience, I've made many of these decisions. For every PhD, there's an equal and opposite PhD. So I don't have to take anyone's word in this. I'm not saying anything that there's something wrong with this, there's something right with this. This is just poor decision making if we don't do anything. That's all. Now, the 2 guys we're talking about, you call them bloggers, that's good. So the way you characterize a person makes it sound diminishing. It diminishes.
Just on the opposite, too. The professor.
I understand that.
Wow,
but this is not Rush Limbaugh and Bill Maher talking here. I want to make sure I got a Democrat and a Republican. Okay? These are 2 credible people. They have Georgia Tech, Princeton. You don't get a job there if you're really like some Lulu. Okay? So now I'm concerned. I don't know anything about this technology. I'm concerned. So what do I say? I say, all right, give me some more information. That's basically what we're saying. Let's just send this back, say, hey, look at this thing, and send it back to us. Now, I have done threat assessments, so I know what this is all about. Do I protect playland? Do I protect the county center? Do I protect this? Do I put a cop here? Do I put a lamp pipe here? And so on and so forth. And some places, 10,000 people a day, I don't put anyone there. So I know, you got to go along with it, but I have no risk assessment given to me by anyone objective in this whole process. That's all I'm looking at.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, I just.
That can be done, again, that can be done with our people, that can be done internally. But all I'm saying with this thing is, with all due respect to somebody coming up with a theory that this could happen, again, it's something that you must, if there are protocols in place, and let's say for the sake of argument now, that those protocols are good, maybe we should look at the protocols, make sure that it's safe. If you have it locked away, Andy, there's no way that you can fiddle with the machine. And if you can't fiddle with the machine, no harm, no foul.
But Greg, all this
you're missing.
What am I missing?
about-
It's not internet.
What about Boss Tweed's guy, who works in the machine,
perfect.
who's does the right now? We have in place a system so that if there is an insider who installs malware, all right, we have several ways of dealing with that, but the most significant way is the fact that there's an audit. And you mentioned before, the printer has a counter on it that could be audited, but it isn't part of our audit procedures now. So if you're suggesting that the remediation or a way of mitigating the threat is to audit the printer counter numbers, then we need to add that to our procedures for this machine. You'll recall that we did add the procedures for this machine. We required that there be a certain number of extra machines because it's used as both a ballot marking device and a scanner when we did the certification, because that was something we knew about when we addressed it at the time. All I'm saying now is this is an issue that has not been addressed in our expert reports. And I'm asking us to have expert reports come back to us, and they may very well conclude that everything that you said is correct.
But what I don't want to do, Doug, is I don't want to have to see this process start from the ab initio, because
I'm not asking for that.
That's good. So if there's
I'm not
something
asking for that.
something that can be tinkered with or looked at, as Andy said, maybe you want to check to see if there's another a procedure that we can put in place. That's fine. But again,
that's all I'm asking
but
for.
People have to understand that what we're talking about, the possibility of doing something to a machine, would take getting that machine physically. Now, mind you, we got counties all over the state. We have machines all over the state. It would take
Commissioner, with due respect, I don't believe that you know that for a fact. And let me just tell you that in every election, you have to insert into the machine ballot configuration software. All right? Now, New York has the toughest regulations in the country on preparation of that ballot configuration software. We are the only state that does not allow contracting out to vendors the preparation of the ballot configuration. We require that be done by our own officials. But even though we require it's done by our own officials, we can't be sure that every person who does that is doing it in an honest fashion.
But the counties do have bipartisan mitigation within their county boards of election.
Agreed. And I think that that's very important. But the fact is that we, neither SLI nor NYSTEC tested to determine whether there is something in the source code that could be triggered by the ballot configuration software to do what professors
they did all say that the software is currently configured and certified will not do this. And they did also
No, they didn't.
Yes, they did.
No.
Their report that was sent out last week.
But they only looked at 10% of the software, and they did not look at the 10% of the source code, and they did not. There's nothing in here that indicates that they looked at the source code that triggers the printer
every
function.
machine. Then, if we failed the certification process, every machine should be looked at.
No, you're not. You're missing the point.
This resolution doesn't call.
This is the
it calls
only
for exactly
machine,
what you and I agreed on.
This is the only machine where the ballot
AutoMark has that
passes-
ability, it's just turned off.
You know,
Correct.
So we should test that if
No,
someone got in.
because we don't allow an AutoMark to count ballots. You have to take the ballot out of the AutoMark and put
But
it
you-
in the
but
scanner
you
to
agree,
be
if it's a
counted.
hand-marked ballot, you can tell the differentiation between a hand strike and a machine strike. So that's one way to look at the ballots in this machine. And the ballot printer audit between the numbers would tell that the soft code and the hard code was entered to activate
All
the
right.
printer to allow it to
All
work.
right, so you agree that we need to amend the audit procedures to require the...
I'm agreeing we may have failed here, but this company met the requirements of this
I'm not
machine.
talking about the company. This
you have been.
machine, no, I haven't been. This machine was certified by us. This machine was certified by the EAC, okay? So that's not the issue. The issue is there is a potential security issue that nobody has addressed yet. And I'm asking us to address it, to look into it, to do just exactly what
But understanding
Commissioner
that
Peterson
to
just
address
said.
it, you have to get past all the securities and have a bad actor.
See,
that a
again,
point?
you're saying that again, I believe, without a full appreciation for how secure those features are. In other words, yes, there's a fence, but how hard is it to
Well, those are our procedures that NYSBOE created.
I agree. Do you understand? All I'm saying is that this is a potential security threat that has not been addressed. It wasn't addressed by the California Red Team that did their Red Team threat assessments. It's just never been addressed.
Well, the red team
And
did
so-
say you couldn't really get to the software. But Mr. Poulos would like to
No,
add something.
you know, they didn't.
Except
and they
for
wrote,
the one little links line that Tom
There
continues to
were
say, but they do-
14 threats that the California Red Team identified, and there were mitigations for those threats that were explicitly addressed. And so all I'm saying is that now I've heard both you and Commissioner Peterson say that the mitigation for this is to audit the printer counter.
No, I said that's a way you could audit.
Okay.
So the allegation that you can't tell how many votes.
Yeah, but
or
we
what-
don't audit it.
Well, that's
It's
our
not-
problem.
Yeah, but so
Listen, let me just say something. I don't know why we're having this argument. I think
I don't
this is simplistic. Show it to someone, say, these are the things we're worried about. Have them give us an answer. If they give us an answer like Greg Egg, fine, then I'm voting for it.
You know, Commissioner, it's not simplistic in
Wait
the
a-
sense, well, no, wait a minute. I think the problem from some aspect is the process has failed, apparently, because this went through a certification process here. We don't trust our own certifiers, which apparently we don't. SLI has been hired by this board. Let me finish. This board has hired SLI and NYSTEC to advise it on how to certify voting machines in this state. That's what we've done. And apparently, we're not satisfied
So I'll tell
with
you
what
why.
they do. Commissioner, let me
Send it to-
finish. I'd like to finish.
Okay,
So apparently, we're not satisfied
right.
with our testing people.
Right. That's absolutely true.
I get that. So are you saying we should get rid of them and find someone new to do testing? Because
Obviously
we don't
not.
trust our
I'm
own testers?
saying
Is that what you're
just
suggesting?
give it back to
asking
them,
to
give it back to
address
them,
this issue.
and
But
see if
we have
these
a
two
process.
wacko professors,
Are you
if you want to
saying-
call them wacko professors,
All right.
are-
The FAA goes through a huge process to certify an airplane, and they find that the 737 MAX 8 is fine. A crash comes down, and they still say, "Wait a minute." We still say the aircraft is safe. The second one comes down, and they say, "Well, maybe we need to look at this again." All right? And I'm not even suggesting that we hold off certification of the machine. It's already certified. I'm not asking that it be decertified. I'm asking that we go back to our experts and say, please address this issue and tell us how much of a threat it is and whether it's been properly
and
mitigated.
also for this same issue to be addressed with the other machines. Right?
Well,
Yes.
except, yes, of course, we still have to certify the Express Vote XL, which is the only other machine that has this particular issue, where there's access of the printer to the ballot after it's been verified by the voter.
And just one more thing. In this particular instance, this machine has been used in 7 states for a number of years, and there has been no crash, first of all. And secondarily, once you get past...
You don't know that for a fact either, right?
Well, you don't know
Because-
that it has, so we'll call it even. But
Right.
however, if we agree that you can get past the security patrols, procedures, the seal placements, all of these documents that we come up with, there is immeasurable points of attack.
Correct.
So what good? I mean, we can
Because-
test this one, but there's going to be one the next day, and one the next day, and one the next day.
Actually, look at our regulations again. Our regulations say that all the points of attack have to be identified in the security analysis.
Point of attack
But
is
this,
taking over the machine.
this point of attack was not
The
identified.
point of attack, though, is I think that's the differentiation that we have. Our point of view is the point of attack is taking over the machine. Your point of attack is once the machine is taken over, or can it spontaneously bust
No.
into
My point is different than both of them. My point is, I don't know, I want someone to tell me. That's
John
all.
Poulos would like to say something if you'd
Yeah,
like to
but
hear
he's
from
the
him.
vendor. I don't mind him saying something. We
Yeah.
talked before, but he's going to defend his machine. How do I know? For every PhD, there's an equal and
Well, I would
opposite
have to say
PhD.
he knows more than anyone else in this room
I
right now about
understand.
his
So did
machine.
the president of Boeing.
So you don't want to hear from the vendor?
I'd like to point out the inherent unfairness of comparing 2 actual plane crashes to a blog post posting a potential vulnerability of a machine. So the comparison of Boeing to Dominion is not fair. So we should just stop that.
You know,
And-
I'm not going to stop it because I consider voting in the United States as one of the most important acts of a person and a citizen in the United States. And anything that interferes with that act, I want to make sure does not happen.
That's fine.
Okay? So don't characterize it that way. And let me tell you this. One of the things that turned me off is that you personally look at these guys as bloggers. I don't even know them. But for you to mention it and characterize them as bloggers
But that's what
on
they
the
call
internet, wait a minute,
themselves.
just wait a minute. On the internet, it's not an appropriate thing to do. If you want support, I wouldn't do that.
Well, one is an actual event, the other is a theory.
Commissioner, may I say a few words? Just to address that. So I actually think that Professor Appel and other stakeholders provide a very important role. It's very different than third-party certified test labs. Just the way they handle the information and the way they're selected. I think that my only comment on the Boeing is I completely agree with you, but I think this is more akin to fears that the 747 has the same problem as the 767 MAX. I'm an engineer, I just said it. So should we test,
I use an analogy.
Well, no, but I think it's a valuable analogy in that we know we have a problem in a completely different system, which is the 767 MAX. I have now made the assertion that it's the same company, there might be same software in the 747. Let's ground the 747s to do the testing. So my perspective on it is as follows. I think that the testing, I think that we complied with the certification. I think I largely agree with Commissioner Kellner's comments that New York has the gold standard for certification and testing. There are very simple mitigations. My 2 comments on this whole topic. When you ignore part of the system and identify one threat, and you ignore n number of barriers to get that far, there are an immeasurable number of threats. And it's not just isolated to a unit that has a built-in printer. It's also incumbent on scanners as well. The comment that we have the paper audit trail, well, there's only a 3% audit to 1. And if we allow that level of scenario, one point of attack on the DS200 or the ICP, if there was unfettered access that no one recognized, and by the way, the same unfettered access at the end, because you would have to undo what you did to not get caught, you could simply add a little printing device to either one of those two scanners and then remove it to effectively do the same thing. So that's why it's not, there's immeasurable number of threats, and the threat was actually specifically raised a number of times through a number of certifications in the holistic view of all of the barriers of the system inside the tabulator and extrinsically outside the tabulator. From our standpoint, frankly, we spent some time with the operations group today demonstrating capabilities that I don't think were really understood, that don't require any change, that allow you to have that level of audit that nullifies the concern that if all of this terrible thing happened and the machines were accessed without anybody knowing, and they were accessed at the end of the machine, and it was widespread across many counties and hundreds of thousands of number of machines, and both times it went unnoticed, the assertion is that you don't know because of the printed ballots are printed already, but we do have protective counters in place to catch this. So it's the equivalent of a seal. So you absolutely know that you have a problem, and you know that it can't go unnoticed. And it's a very simple procedural change, frankly, to put this into place. My only comment in the entirety of all the systems is it's not part of your certification to ignore half of the system and then identify threats that come up once you ignore half of the system's capabilities. If you modify your certification procedure, I'm sure all the vendors will, seek to understand what you're doing and comply. But I don't think it's a difficult thing, and I think it's something that your operations group can already do. And as I say, it doesn't even affect your certification guidelines. That's my point of view.
No, I appreciate what you said. It doesn't change my opinion on what I think we should do.
Sure.
I actually agree with him. I think that's all this says. All this, we're not decertifying that. We're not taking the certification away. We're not looking to decertify. There's nothing like that. We're just looking for closure on this issue. That's all. And if you're so certain that there can be closure on this issue with that kind of explanation.
Commissioner, my only question, and I mentioned this to Commissioner Kellner on Thursday, is why aren't we having the same questions on all of the other systems that are currently certified, including the AutoMark that has the AutoCast feature that has been certified by the board, even though it's not in use? It doesn't matter. It's still certified.
First of all, the AutoCast feature is not certified, and it can't be used because there's no way.
And the DS200.
Wait! You just said something, John.
Sure.
And if you have an open mind, you have to listen. But what is annoying is you say what I regard as the damnedest things, like the AutoMark. So in New York, how would you trigger that on an AutoMark so that the ballot could be counted in a way that would affect the election?
Are you talking practically? I don't think you can.
Well, that's the point.
I just looked at, I also think the same thing is true with the ICE unit, though. Practically, you can't.
Well, and
all
I want to do is ask our experts that question and have them answer that question. And if you're so sure that that's the case, then I don't understand why the resistance to asking them.
Just in fairness, he agreed. Dominion has agreed to meet with all of those people and do all that before this meeting.
So why are we arguing then? Let's just go ahead and get NYSTEC and SLI to address the issue.
What does that mean? What does that mean, address the issue?
Well, explicitly, what I asked them to do was to supplement their reports with respect to these issues.
I mean, I have a response from SLI that was given to us. I think, Tom, you guys sought this out, where they did address this.
Yeah.
I assume you've seen that. That's not satisfactory, is that what you're saying?
But
In the SLA
NYSTEC,
response, they said they did not look at this specific issue. They did say that they thought that the likelihood of it being carried out was low.
They said, while SLI compliance did not specifically test to this exact scenario, we did test the ability to modify or change the voting software firmware of the device, as well as attempting to modify the results after and during the process of ballots being
Right.
cast.
but since that time, we've had Dominion indicate that there is a mode in the machine to have the ballot directly go from the printer to the ballot box. And issue. Geo said that in Westchester.
thoroughly.
Let me finish.
Sure.
All right? And NYSTEC has said that these issues haven't been tested. Now remember,
That they know of. They weren't aware if SLI had tested them or not.
That's right.
Correct.
Fair to NYSTEC, so they
Right.
don't know.
Correct. Now, in 2008, NYSTEC, which had the same function with respect to the voting machines that were certified in 2008, identified that Cyber, which at that time was our independent testing authority, was only testing about 1/3 of the actual test requirements. And it led to NYSTEC disclosing that information to the EAC, and the EAC disaccredited Cyber, which is one of the reasons our certification process was so delayed. And so we've retained NYSTEC to do these kinds of reviews. And all I'm asking is that they look at this and tell us whether or not it has been adequately reviewed. Now, NYSTEC gave us another report a few days ago, was it Thursday or Friday?
Friday.
That identified what they think should be the additional review in order to answer this
They
question.
said the threat was
and address it.
was low, but if we wanted to add mitigating procedures, we could. And most of them we could do procedurally without ever looking at the machine.
Well,
So
I think we need to,
if I may, so in looking at some of the things that were mentioned previously, so Commissioner Keller mentioned before in our regs, it does require that the voting system must be secure against attempts to interfere with correct system operation. The vendor shall identify each potential point of attack, and then for each potential point of attack, the vendor shall identify the technical safeguards embodied in the voting system to defend against attack, and it goes on. And then also one of our other parts of the regulation, it talks about the submitted voting system software does not contain any code, procedures, or other material, including but not limited to viruses, worms, time bombs, and drop-dead devices that may cause the voting system to cease functioning at a future time, which may disable, damage, disarm, or otherwise affect the proper operation of the voting system, any hardware, or any computer system or other property of the State Board or County Board. I think what's being asked is, did we do our due diligence in making sure that those two things were followed? And if in NYSTEC's response from Friday, one of the things that they had proposed was possibly a complete security source code review, if not done already. Now, it looks like from what SLI gave us in their findings document from last year, that they said they did use automated tools to look at the entirety of the source code, but that's the entirety of what they told us in that findings document. So if it's a matter of NYSTEC as our independent security reviewer to look at that source code review to determine that whether or not it was done, in its completeness, which is the whole point of our independent security expert, is to make sure that whoever did the testing did the right thing.
So Tom, why did we certify this? You're going back to what you think SLI did or didn't do when they actually did the testing.
We didn't
NYSTEC
review this
checked it or
issue.
not. But I'm not just talking this issue anymore. I'm talking about,
Understood.
you're saying to me that we don't have confidence based on what NYSTEC told us that SLI is doing a complete review of the source code.
So
is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is that NYSEC pointed out things in their response on Friday where they're unaware of the totality of what SLI did. That's what NYSEC's saying, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying simply is, as part of what I read in the 62096, there was, as part of the documentation that Dominion provided us in the TDP, a threat matrix, which basically is where they enumerated all the different points of attack and how to mitigate those threats. What I think we're looking to figure out was that complete and comprehensive? Perhaps the answer is yes, in which case, great, we're done. And if we need to change our procedures or process for some reason because this did kind of like fall through the cracks, then we need to do so.
Well,
NYSEC also mentioned a number of different mitigating, things that
Why
could
is
be done.
NYSEC bringing this up now? Why didn't they bring this up back?
I can't
when-
speak
Because
for
I
NYSEC
brought
Commission.
it up.
No,
I
back in December
Why
when
didn't they bring
OGS
this
raised
up?
it.
Why didn't they bring this up, though, when the report was delivered to us by SLI? If there's not proof in that report that
Well,
they,
back in
that they
December.
reviewed all the source code, why didn't NYSEC raise that with us at the time?
Because I think with regard to the issue that was mentioned by Professor Apple, NYSEC explicitly said that they did not envision that point of attack.
Let's take Professor Appel off the table for a minute. I'm just
And
talking
I'm-
about any particular source code review. You're saying that we expect the SLI to review all source code of any machine that we're going to certify, and you're now saying
No,
that
no, no,
NYSEC
that's-
is saying
wait,
they're not
wait,
sure.
that's not true.
They're not sure that they did that appropriate review.
So what I'm stating is what's in our regulations for what's supposed to be done to our regulations. So SLI in their findings document stated that they use automated tools in order to scan through the entirety of the source code for certain things. I don't know what those certain things are, and I don't know if they completely represent what was in this regs. I would hope that would be the case, and I would hope that they would come back and say, we did look for all these things and
So
everything's
they're not
okay.
reviewing the source code to see if there's any fault within the source code on any reason for any possible problem with our machine. You're saying they didn't focus in on this one issue, but that they didn't do a general review to make sure the source code did not have some sort of malware or Trojan horse or anything else embedded in it to make sure that that was a problem?
It would be my belief that they did a general review of the entirety of the source code based on New York State regulations. What I'm trying to figure out is not necessarily the outcome, is what are the threats? What are the actual threats? So Dominion did enumerate a number of them, and perhaps that's the totality of the universe we should be concerned with, as far as unauthorized access to the EMS system, or ability to change the firmware. And there are steps already in place for mitigation. So now we have both NYSEC, who had suggested a couple of things as far as like a hardline power stop so that you couldn't use the printer after the voting system. And we also have Dominion here, who is also explaining that there are additional things that could be done that perhaps we're not doing already or we're not aware of that might be just additional procedures that we have to start following in order to mitigate this. So I want to make sure, as a director of election operations, that my unit is doing its due diligence to ensure that the security of these machines
But Tom,
is
I'd like
as
some
secure as
assurance
possible.
that when you guys look at a certification that's coming before this board, you've done your due diligence before we get it. And that we aren't doing this afterwards again, where we decide afterwards we didn't do something in the certification process that maybe we should have done. That's what I'd like to make sure of, and you guys apparently didn't do that due diligence. Is that what you're saying?
That falls on me completely, Commissioner. If that's the case, then I apologize for not doing our due diligence.
One of the things that I would point out is when the legislature.
I mean, you're putting us all in a bad spot here. We certify a machine, people go out based on that certification to purchase machines, to sell machines, to use machines. If that certification process isn't reliable, we have a huge problem.
Agreed.
The election law 7.
Bigger than this one issue.
Agreed.
Election law 7201(3) though does anticipate the possibility that from time to time information that comes up after the certification process would require a re-examination because they are very complicated systems and sometimes you may miss something. I'm not making light of anything. I'm just saying that there are times when the process requires a little bit of a look back.
But shouldn't this have been done in December when this blog post was raised and OGS questioned us?
Yeah. And who told me about the blog post in December? Nobody copied me and said OGS has questioned this.
No, in fact, the response from our unit was the machine that what he said would not be allowed.
The machine that's certified.
Right. That this would not be allowed because they would need to need to be compromised by a bad actor and then additional software installed. So the response from us was, it's not a problem.
Can I
Now we're
suggest
saying,
something?
no, we're not done. So now you're saying there is a problem.
Oh, I don't know if there is a
There
problem,
could
but I don't
be a
think that
problem.
I'm not.
But the problem is you're not able to say there isn't a problem. And we're saying back then there isn't a problem, but now you're not able to say that. Is that what you're saying?
I'm able to say that with 100% certainty. I can't tell you whether or not there's a problem.
But you were back in December.
I'm still confident of my statement that as certified, the system does not perform this task.
Okay.
that's not the issue here. The issue is, if I can get past what's certified, can I still accomplish this outcome?
But don't we look at those issues when we are certifying that we have mitigation processes in place, like nobody gets access to our voting machines unless there's a bipartisan team available to make sure there's nothing nefarious going on? Aren't those part of the protocols to ensure this kind of activity doesn't occur? And aren't those in place now? And isn't that what we rely on? I mean, I know there's been a lot of pointing at the audit trail, and that's fine, and we do have that. But we have a lot of upfront mitigations as well, which I don't think we're focused on, which is you don't get access to our machines just walking in the door. You have to go through a security process. We have bipartisan teams that have to be given access to the machine, if at all. We have mitigations that are in place to make sure these machines are not invaded by an outside bad actor and compromised in some way. So to act like, oh, well, the only mitigation here is this audit that we do at the end, and that's what we all rely on, and if that's compromised, there's no other mitigation. There are other mitigations, and I don't think they're being given nearly enough credit, because in my mind, we shouldn't be relying on the audit to catch something that happened. We should be preventing things from happening, and I think we've done that. We have our boards are making sure these machines are secure at all times. We were talking about that earlier when we do the early voting, that the machines at the end of the night have to be locked down, they have to be secured, they have to be made sure they're not accessed by anybody that we don't know about. These are all in place now. That's what's meant to mitigate all this stuff.
Nothing
I don't
works,
think we're giving nearly...
Nothing works perfectly.
Well, of course not, Commissioner.
Okay, so
nothing works perfectly.
Nothing works perfectly.
And I get that.
And, you know,
I get
and berating him for doing this.
I'm not
I think
berating him.
yeah,
I'm just raising an issue here that I'm finding out about this
I think you
here
are.
last week when Commissioner
They do a great job, but I am...
Commissioner Kellner is testifying before Westchester County Legislative Committee. This is like the first I'm hearing of this issue. It's not brought to me.
No, I sent you
It's brought to them.
That's
It's
not
brought
true.
to
I
them
sent you the...
as you were going to the meeting, I guess.
memorandum.
As you were going to the
No,
meeting.
I sent it to
but
you
I mean,
the day
I want to
before.
know about this stuff up front.
Commissioner,
I think we have a
I think we're
responsibility
doing
here.
more damage to the reputation of the vendor by having this discussion in this way than we could ever do by voting for this particular thing.
No.
And I want to apologize to you about that. I really do. Because I didn't mean to be this way. We would have had a vote. It would have been 2-2. And then maybe we would have done something else. But this is not something to try to get anybody. I am not comfortable. I've been put here by people in the government who appointed me to make sure I vote the right way in terms of making sure the people are okay when they go vote. So I'm concerned. You're not. I don't mind disagreeing.
That's not true. That's
I don't
unfair
no,
to
I didn't mean
characterize
no,
me.
no, no. I didn't mean you're not.
I do care.
I didn't mean you're not
about the whole
concerned about
process,
voting.
though.
I'm sorry. I
do
mean
care
you're not
about the whole
concerned
process.
about
I
passing
am
it.
concerned about all of this. I'm very concerned about it. I'm concerned about how it came up. I'm concerned about what it is and whether we've addressed it or not. I'm absolutely concerned about this stuff. But I'm trying to understand
You're not
how this happened.
concerned to the depth of I am about this one issue. You think that it's very hard to get into this machine and therefore no one's going to do it or ever get to it. I am concerned that that may not be true. I want someone to tell me, not you, not you, not you. I want someone to tell me objectively, look, same thing he said. They don't have to get up and run around, but they could get up. They could just say it, and I'd be very satisfied.
Now, who's they? Who are you?
Whoever the objective people we're giving this.
We're talking about SLI and NYSTEC again?
Yeah, well, that's fine.
You know, Randy, I'll tell you something. The reason I did pop up like that and get that excited was because it offended my sense of fairness. And I just didn't think we were being fair to this particular company over an issue that, frankly, is a real stretch. And, you know, Tom Connolly, is a very bright young man. He's doing the right thing. He's doing the right job. And if you go look back at his email of December 18th, you know what? He looked at it, and I'm convinced that at the time he looked at it and basically told the state there is no problem here. He was convinced of that at that point. Certain things have transpired since that time. Well, all of a sudden now, oh, wait a minute, we've got to take a second look. I'm never opposed to a second look. However, again, being fair, let's take a look at this. And what are we really talking about here? And I think Bob Warren is here. He can take you through the paces as far as the protections that you have on each of these devices, the number of tags on each of them, and so forth that you have to get through. If something has to be said or watched at that juncture, so nobody can even gain access, because obviously this doesn't happen without an individual gaining the access and opening up the box.
I know what you're saying.
One at a time.
Look, this is not a standard that we're applying just to one company.
I understand.
Okay, this standard is going to be applied to, we're going to ask the same question about anyone else who applies with their machine, correct?
Correct.
And the public should know, this is not anything to be negatively about the vendor. Nothing. This has nothing to do with them. It has to do with a process. And I tell you, I would do this on a million other things, not only this one. There's more information out there, two credible people, credible. In my eyes, maybe not, I don't know, but in the eyes of the public, yes. So consequently, we don't live in a vacuum. We should take the comments that we get from the public and other people, if we have credible comments, and do it. As I said, if these were two flakes off the wall, I wouldn't be sitting.
You may have just said it right there.
if they were. I don't know.
They're very smart. Beside the point.
But that's my point.
I think that our staff had moved in a direction somewhere along the line here to do pretty much what we're saying. They've spoken to the parties, get them in the room, let's take it, and it doesn't have to be done like the Inquisition. What has to be done is to take a look at this, and are there any vulnerabilities, and report back to us.
What if we, you give it to NYSBOE and this, and I just have an informal conversation with them? Can you do that?
We can certainly have conversations with SLI and NYSBOE along with Dominion if they have any questions. I think the totality of what we would need to look at is not just the threats and whether or not we've enumerated all the threats and the mitigation strategies, and perhaps we've done that. But I think, like I said, both NYSBOE and Dominion have offered additional things that can be done to make the systems more secure. And so I think we need to kind of consider that as well. And also to what Commissioner Kellner was saying earlier, if we decide that to really make sure that we're dotting all our I's and crossing all our T's, that we have to figure out some way of incorporating any sort of counter functionality into a post-election audit. These are all options that we would bring before you, and you as the Board of Elections would decide what to go forward with.
I'm fine with that.
Right.
I'm fine with that.
Okay.
I'm okay with that.
So I'm not sure what we're doing. Let me get a hard, so you're gonna talk with SLI and NYSBOE to identify any potential issues that may exist with this particular system?
We will have a conversation with the both of them to determine what information either one might need to provide the other, just to kind of make sure that we're confident that everything was done correctly. So one example might be that we would want to get more details from SLI on the security source code review that they did, so we could provide that to NYSBOE, so that NYSBOE could look at that and say, yep, they did a good job, or they missed this. I don't know. That's what we pay NYSBOE for. In addition, if there's any questions about functionality, we did try to do this last week where we had Dominion on a conference call with NYSBOE because NYSBOE has some questions. We're more than happy to facilitate those conversations going forward. We're more than happy to have conversations with both NYSBOE, SLI, and Dominion about any additional steps that we should consider taking which might help to mitigate this threat.
Okay.
Is this going to be limited just to this, or are we looking at all the machines that we have?
What are the other issues?
What do you want to do?
I'm just asking, we talked about
I mean,
the whole fleet of machines,
look at
so
security.
I just want to know what direction that if we're going in the right direction.
If you're aware of any unaddressed security threats for the existing machines, of course we should be looking at them. None of those have been called to my attention.
Or mine.
But if there are points of attack that have not been addressed, then we should assess them.
But at the very least, we would be looking at the same issue with the ExpressVote XL, since it does share the same paper panel with the
but
scanner.
that's going through the certification process now.
Correct.
And so is SLI also the ITA for the ExpressVote?
They're doing the vendors.
They're doing the vendor source code, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Just
so
make
they're
clear.
aware that this is an issue that they should look at with the ExpressVote as well as.
And we will be explicitly making sure that they include this in their review.
So what's our time frame?
I was just going to say, this should be done as expeditiously as possible, because I don't think, in my mind,
Yes.
I don't think there is a cloud over any of this. Is there a question? That's one thing. I wouldn't call it a cloud. I call it a little drip from the heavens. That's it. So We have certified these and so forth. It remains that way. It's a safe, it's a safe machine. It certainly can be used with confidence by the voter. The only thing we're going to take a look at is there any way that somebody could breach our security measures and get into the machine and do something? And that's a question, fine, let them answer that.
Yeah, and what is the probability of
issue.
someone being able to do that?
Yeah, very small. But, yeah, right, but let them tell us.
And not just that, but also are there any additional protections that we could put in place that make us even more
Yeah.
secure?
Good.
My name is Susan Cohen. Can I just make one quick
You
comment?
can make one quick comment.
I found out about this whole controversy on a Facebook page by a blogger named Jenny Cohn, who, to me, could have a license in nothing, and she's spreading fear already. So when you hear hackability, when you hear point of attack, and you're someone, a voter, and you're seeing it on Facebook, the panic is already spread. So every day that this question looms, you're losing public trust, you're losing the credibility of the state board. I've been following this board for 20 years, even though you haven't seen me recently. I've been very involved with accessibility. I actually helped Dominion gather data from the disability community that brought those adjustments in the ICE, and that's why I'm here today, to answer any questions of the work we did and why those adjustments were made. And I can answer those questions because I'm the one that worked with Dominion to develop that and their engineers. But what I'm really scared about is the credibility of this board. I know that you've got very good, committed, dedicated people in this room who've worked incredibly hard, and all of you care, obviously. The problem is the public, because of what's going on in the country, what's going on in Georgia, what's going on in different states, now everybody is at alert. I'm concerned that Dominion, who is doing their best, is going to be ruined for every unanswered question we have, and I don't feel that's fair. And that is what I feel. This could become more of a public relations nightmare, because if people are afraid to use the machines, you should have heard the debates I got in with Facebook when I was just trying to say, slow down.
Can I ask you something?
Absolutely.
Was that debate that you got into with people after we met on this? We just met now.
This was 4 days ago.
Yeah, but I'm saying it's out there already. We can help if we get answers here and we just maintain everything is fine. That's helpful.
Well, it's helpful as long as it's done quickly.
Yeah.
Because
we agree.
Because every day that goes by where those posts are being led, and I've got a whole bunch of posts on my computer, they're calling it Dieselgate. There's already a name to describe it, and they're saying that Brian, the new governor of Georgia, wants the ImageCast ICE because it's easy to hack. That's the kind of stuff that's going out there. New York has the most stringent security measures that I can tell from all my research, and we don't want the credibility of New York in danger. So that's what I want to say. So whatever we can do to mitigate this quickly, please let's do that.
Okay, thank you. All right. I guess that's the last item on the agenda, unless there's something else somebody wants to bring up. If not, we'll adjourn till April 29th, I believe is the next meeting. Is that correct?
29th.
Correct.
Okay. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.